I spent the first 2.5 years of my life living with me, of course me, my mom, my dad, and a chimpanzee in a trailer home traveling across America. My dad's name is David, my mom's name is Judy, the chimp's name is Spanky. For real. My dad was a performer with Ice Capades. He and the chimp both skated together. He was one of the featured acts, one of the headline acts, and he was with Ice Capades for about 15 to 18 years. Now, I have no memories of Spanky. I wish I did, but I don't. But I have the memories of the stories that my mom told me about living with Spanky. And he sounds like a pretty wonderful chimp and a pretty good role model. Like for me, what my mom would say is if I would cry or get fussy, he would come over and tickle me. If someone came into the trailer that Spanky did not know, he would come stand by my crib in a protective stance. If my shoes came off, he would try to put them back on. He wasn't real good with left and right, but he would try to put them back on. And if I really cried, he would do backflips for me. Now, my parents got divorced, my mom got me, my dad got Spanky. But my mom told me, and I have memories of this, that up until about age 4 or 5, when I got really excited, I would bounce up and down like a chimp. My older brother. So, the main focus of this story takes place in 1964. And in 1964, my dad was a 28-year-old man, and this is Spanky. And in 1964, Larry Raines was about to become a serial killer. He was 19 years old. Now, my dad was a Northwestern theater major, so he wanted to be famous. And he thought that doing Ice Capades would be the best way to do it. And he was in the same class as like Jerry Orbach, because my dad was a musical theater major. Which is why in so many of the Ice Capade photos, he's smiling like he's in a musical. And he trained Spanky to smile too. As you can see from Larry Raines, what you see is much more of a smirk. Now, in 1964, you could still have ice skating chimps wearing costumes and doing things. This is all pre-PETA. There's no way my dad could do that now. Well, not just because he's 83, but he would not be allowed to bring a chimp on stage wearing a costume. My dad was very proud of the fact that he made the costumes for him and Spanky, and he made the routines. Now, Ice Capades loved having a skating chimp. So Spanky had his very own headshot. This is the composite headshot from Ice Capades. Spanky, world's only ice skating chimp, you think? Now, one thing I want to point out is that he's jumping over stuffed animals. I don't know how you feel about that. And the woman in the circus outfit holding Spanky, that's my mom. They also had later on other things where they would take other press photos. And after my parents got divorced, my dad met his second wife. Her name is Anita. She just recently passed. She had went to the Fame High School in New York and was in the same graduating class as Liza Minnelli. She was 5'1" and couldn't fulfill her dream of being a Broadway dancer, so she auditioned for the Ice Capades and got in as one of the chorus. And there she met my dad and they fell in love. And here's a different press Ice Capades photo of my dad, Anita, and Spanky. Now, one of the things that most people don't realize is that what they think is a monkey is actually a chimp. And there's really one main difference to tell the difference between a monkey and a chimp. This is one of the stuffed animals that was given to me when I was a child, because people used to give me stuffed animals that were chimpanzees because they thought, hey, you know, his dad is with an ice skate with a chimp. So this is one, and it's pretty right looking. So if you ever want to know the main difference, the only difference between a monkey and a chimp, monkeys have tails and chimps do not. But part of the reason why everyone thinks that chimps are monkeys is that what you see on TV and in movies is predominantly juvenile chimps. Maybe up till the age of teenage years. Because when they get to be adults, they are too fucking big, too fucking strong, and too fucking willful. So they always put chimps that are babies, and toddlers, and children, and teenagers. And that's what you see. So they're about the same size as a lot of monkeys. So a lot of people get confused about the difference between a monkey and a chimpanzee. My dad had different chimps over the course of his career. Spanky was the first one, the second one was Spanky Jr., and then after that they had different names, but they all performed underneath the name Spanky, which kind of made them like the Menudo of chimps. At one point, Spanky had his own fan club. And there were over 50,000 kids who had joined that fan club. And this was back when you had to write out a form and mail it in and send a stamp. It was not like a Facebook liking. So 50,000 liking you and being part of the fan club was pretty amazing. It was all run by the Ice Capades promo department. When you joined, you would get a form letter that was supposedly from Spanky. And you would get a balloon, and you would also get this button that says, I'm a little ape for Spanky. Now, they knew they had a good thing with an ice skating chimp. You know, it reached a point to where they just, in the promos, talked about Spanky and rarely mentioned my dad. This is one of the actual Ice Capades photos of the year when they had a circus theme. You can see that in the middle of the photo is my dad and Spanky. Right there. All these other people, clowns, somebody in a camel outfit, another camel outfit, and in the middle, my dad and Spanky the Chimp. Here's a photo of my dad at a later year with a different chimp, where he was doing something based on, well, I'll just show it to you. He made the costume and was based in Alice in Wonderland. My dad was on TV a lot. He was on talk shows. You know, after my parents got divorced, I would see my dad one day a year. I would see him more on TV than I would see him in person. Because, you know, on TV, they always wanted a skating chimp. Now, Spanky would do things only if he was getting paid. He was a total union chimp. If you wanted him to perform, he had to be fed. If you wanted him to rehearse, he had to be fed. If you wanted him to pose for a photo, he had to be fed. You don't feed him, he doesn't fucking do anything. Here's a photo, an actual promo photo, of Spanky for president. He was fed. And in this photo, I don't know why they have two Spankies on there. It's a little confusing, but you can actually see the kind of ice skating that my father did with Spanky, and how what he's doing with chimps is not what chimps normally want to do. He would have Spanky jump over hoops and barrels, and occasionally jump through hoops of fire. He had to feed them a lot. This is one of my favorite photos. This is the actual Ice Capades cast photo from 1964. 1964, that's a really important time period because that's the year that my dad met Larry Raines. Take a look at this photo in 1964. Part of what I love about it is in Ice Capades you have national champions. You have Olympic champions, European champions. People who've dedicated their entire life to being ice skaters and being great at it. And here they are making their living in Ice Capades, and in the middle of the goddamn photo is a chimp. None of them get center stage, but the chimp does. The chimp in a tuxedo. Because. This is a photo from when my dad was on the Arthur Godfrey show, along with Liza Minnelli. And some other people that were famous at the time, but I don't know who they are now. Larry Raines never had any celebrity. Larry Raines grew up in Michigan. He and his brother Danny Raines are the only serial killer brothers that we're aware of in America, depending upon how you feel about Frank and Jesse James. Larry Raines first started. He was younger than his brother, but he went on the killing spree first. In his time period of killing, he killed 17 people. After he went in prison, Danny ended up killing 5 people. Larry and Danny Raines hated each other. What kind of 7 kinds of hell was going on in that house to produce not 1 but 2 serial killers? From what we know from some of the interviews that I've seen with psychologists, both Larry Raines' parents were alcoholics. Both were physically abusive. But the father worked at a gas station attendant and was rarely around, except for when he would come home to drink or fight or hit. But it was the mother who did most of that. In 1964, my father was living in Los Angeles, and he had to drive with Spanky in a van to Duluth, Minnesota, because Duluth, Minnesota is where Ice Capades would have a 2-week rehearsal process before going on the national tour. My father was driving from Los Angeles, and outside Las Vegas, he saw a young man hitchhiking. And the young man wore a tie and a white shirt, had a pipe, and looked really spiffy. My dad said he thought, this is a nice young Christian guy, I'll pick him up. What he didn't know is that just before he picked him up, Larry Raines had killed a family of 4. A mother, a father, and 2 children. And then after killing him, he went into the shower and washed off all the blood. Larry Raines kept mementos belonged to the boy, and the pipe belonged to the father. Now think about this moment. This amazing moment that might be the only time in the history of humanity that this moment ever happened. That a celebrity and a serial killer and a chimpanzee were in the same place going somewhere. And think about what everyone considers as their normal. My dad, for normal, is him driving a van with a chimpanzee because that's what he does. And for Larry Raines at this point, killing people is normal because that's what he does. So think about that moment when my dad lets him in and opens up the door. Larry Raines, who's just killed a family of 4, walks into a van and sees a chimpanzee. What was going on in his head at that moment? Did he think, oh man, I've really gone too far? Or did he think, well, yes, when you leave the bonds of humanity, this is what happens. Now, my dad had no idea that Larry Raines was a serial killer. In fact, that really wasn't talked about that much in 1964. There were no cell phones, computers were the size of this stage. There were not a lot of information from the police department talking state to state. So in 1964, it was fairly easy to be a criminal and do crimes across state to state to state because no one could catch up with you. Also in 1964, we didn't have the same awareness about serial killers like we do now. So my dad just thought that Larry Raines was sort of an annoying punk. Just sort of an annoying guy. But they're driving, so they may as well go. At some point, Larry Raines pulled a gun on my dad. But only after he talked to my dad about Spanky the Chimp, because he was fascinated with Spanky the Chimp, as most people are, because it's a chimp. But Larry Raines kept referring to him as a monkey, because most people don't know the difference between a monkey and a chimp. So, after asking all these questions about Spanky, he made my dad get in the cage with Spanky. And for the rest of the night, Larry Raines, drove the van while my dad was in the cage with Spanky. Now, part of this is what's really interesting is that he was so interested in Spanky because some of the interviews have shown that when he was a child and their family dog died, he felt nothing. He felt nothing that their family pet died. But he showed interest in this chimp. Larry Raines says in some of his interviews that before he would kill people, he would try to guess where the blood was going to splatter. He would try to figure out where it was going to go and how it was going to go. And one of the things that's interesting to me is that he said he was always wrong. He could never guess where the blood was going to go. So my dad is in the cage for an entire night. Spanky is freaking the fuck out. My dad said he spent most of the time talking to Spanky, trying to calm him down. Larry Raines has since said that night he thought about killing my dad and Spanky and driving the van into a river. The next morning, Larry Raines let my dad out of the cage and said, "How's it feel? How's it feel to know that you got lucky? How's it feel to know that I was going to kill you, but I'm not?" And my dad was like, "Thanks." Because he still didn't really know who he was dealing with. He thought Larry Raines was a robber. And Larry Raines said that he was going to kill my dad, but he was worried about what would happen to Spanky. So they spent the next 2 days traveling across America. They even had a hotel room together. Separate beds. And my dad was going to drive to Duluth, Minnesota, but Larry Raines wanted to go to the Kalamazoo area of Michigan. And my dad did not feel like he was really in a position to do anything about it, so he drove to Kalamazoo, Michigan. And when they got there, Larry Raines asked for my dad's wallet. So my dad gave it to him. And my dad asked for some money for gas so he could get back to Duluth. Asked for a 10, Larry Raines gave him a 20 because Larry Raines felt like they were pretty good buddies at that point. He said goodbye to my dad, but he also said goodbye to Spanky. And then he left. And then my dad started driving down from Duluth towards Chicago. 10 hours after he left my father, Larry Raines killed the last person that he killed. Person number 17. And the person that he killed was an English professor. And that English professor had a student who was like a mentee of the guy that died. And he ended up writing a book about Larry Raines. And this book is called Luke Karamazov. Why Luke Karamazov? Well, in prison, for some reason, Larry Range changed his name officially to Monk Steppenwolf. So this guy wrote this book called Luke Karamazov, and he changed everybody's names. And one of the chapters, he changed my dad's name to Mike. Dave, Mike, okay. And he changed Spanky's name to Zippy. And I was like, why Zippy? Why even change the name? Are you worried that the chimp's going to sue you? I was thinking like, oh, well, he can ice skate, so he can probably sue me. And I was like, that's not even a good chimp name. It's not like Mr. Buttons. Zippy? That's the pinhead's name. That's my older brother you're talking about. So, this book was written Larry Raines and Danny Raines hate each other, as I said. When they were both in the same prison, they kept trying to kill each other. They had to be separated and put into different prisons. Now, there is some woman who ended up marrying from prison. It's his prison shop. You look at this photo. There is evil in those eyes. This is the photo of Danny Raines, his older brother. You know, there's always that question of nature versus nurture. I think it's pretty clear that Larry Raines might have been born a psychopath, but Danny became one. And of course, they hate each other. Not just because they married somebody else, or the same person, or took over each other's kids, but also, who killed who more? You know what it is with us guys? It's always about numbers. 17-5. I still wonder why Larry Raines changed his name to Monk. Because Monk is like short for monkey. And for what it seems like, Spanky the Chimp was the last thing that Larry Raines actually cared about or felt empathy towards or sympathy towards or any kind of caring. This is what Larry Raines looks like now. Every time I tell this story, it grows because I find out more information. And this is one of the things I found out today. One of the Raines children, whose name is Steppenwolf, this is from Kalamazoo, March 13th, 2018. Man sentenced for Kalamazoo crime spree. The man was sentenced to prison for several felonies for a crime spree over a year ago. Matthew Steppenwolf was sentenced for 30 years in prison for armed robbery and 2 counts of felony, 7 counts for arson, carjacking, and weapons building. He pleaded guilty. This is Danny Raines' son, who was also then adopted by Larry Raines. And he's now in prison as well. "17 people killed." And also during those 3 days, whenever they would pull into a gas station, Larry Raines would rob it and then shoot the gas station attendant. He never killed the gas station attendants, but he did kill families. 17 people. If not for Spanky, my half-sisters would never have been born. My nieces and nephew would never have been born. And my dad would be dead. 17 people. My dad was the only person to survive having an encounter with Larry Raines. Why? Everyone loves a monkey.